Well, good afternoon, everyone, to another in our Tuesday at 2 seminars, masterclasses, training activities. These are free public education events that we promote, usually at least once, maybe twice a month. And we'd like to welcome everybody who signed up. And if you signed up and you weren't able to attend, please, we do encourage you to watch the recording. Quick word about who we are. This is me. I'm your moderator for the day. If you have technical problems, I will try to resolve them in the background. I'm Dendra Bess. I'm the Executive Director for Wastewater Education. We're a nonprofit organization. We're based in the northern Michigan area, but we service the Great Lakes and indeed the entire country. And as I just recently did a workshop for Queensland, Australia, I guess we're getting very international here. We are in the process of seeking funding to be able to provide closed captioning for all of our events. But in the meantime, if English is not your primary language, or you may request, or if you are experiencing hearing problems, you may request a text transcript of this event. Please just email me, and I did put the contact information right there in the chat window for you. And a quick disclaimer here that we provide this as we're intending to provide a forum for the free exchange of ideas among individuals and organizations. And we desire to form partnerships and resource networks with anyone who is interested in integrated water resource planning and management. And that the information and conclusions presented in our events represent the opinions of the presenters. They should not be construed as necessarily representing our opinions or be an endorsement by our organization of any particular vendor, technology, or interest. Now, that being said, we have two presenters today that I think you're going to be able to sit back and learn a great deal from. When we put out the PR for this event, we did so because we actually received a specific request from an agency that shall remain nameless, but I think everyone can identify with the issues they were having to deal with, which is that they are charged by law to enact and carry out mandated activities as an environmental health regulatory agency. However, those regulations, especially in the climate of the recently conducted, thank goodness, election, became extremely acrimonious and caused a lot of conflict in the community, and that conflict translated into an extremely stressful workplace. And there were two issues the entity asked us to address. One was, how do we as individuals not take this home to our families at night? And how do we as regulators impart to the public and those affected that we really are doing this not to be bloody-minded, but because it's the law and because it actually is going to improve your life and the environment. And at this point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to turn this over to Wanda Joseph and Bill Waters and let them introduce themselves and their biographies. Go ahead.
Well, welcome. Troubled waters. I thought that maybe we should get some life jackets for it, eh, Dendra?
Sorry? What do you
We
need?
need life jackets for this troubled waters.
We'll mail them out by email with the follow-up.
Great.
Are you going to advance your own slides, Wanda, or do you want me to?
Well, I can do it. Bill, do you want to come on?
Here I am.
Okay, go ahead, guys.
So, I'm going to take it back a bit because I want to just talk a little bit. I have been working with conflict training for conflict management and mediating for about 20 years. And I find it intriguing and somewhat worrisome that I actually look for conflicts to jump into. So I am here today to present some ideas for perhaps thinking about conflict differently. And I look forward to hearing some of your stories. Bill?
Hello, everybody. I'm talking to you from Marquette. For those of you who don't know Marquette, it's on the south shore of Lake Superior. It's a wonderfully pristine part of Michigan that hardly anybody thinks about when you say you're from Michigan. I've been here for 30 plus years. I've been doing mediation in one venue or another for a little over 20 years of that. I can tell you that I'm as interested and passionate in the dynamics and the resolution of conflict today as I was 20 years ago. I don't know what it is. It's hard to explain, even to myself, that one would be passionate about conflict, but so be it.
To start us off, we have a question for you. So there are a lot more choices than this, but if these were your 4 choices, using the tools for answering questions, and for those of you who are not answering, I would guess that you would like to have another choice here. Okay, there we go. Good. Well, that's helpful. And the intestinal engulfing pain, I think, is a matter that will take another day's session. Let's look at it another way. When I'm in a conflict at work, I slip out the back door as quickly as I can, or I figure out the solution and try to fix it. I'd like to emphasize, I figure out the solution and try to fix it. I know that I'm going to have to meet the other side halfway, or I choose my battles carefully. If you were to respond to one of those, to pick your favorite response, what one would that be?
And if you look in the chat window there, Bill and Wanda, you'll see that Kemper put in there. There should be an E, which is it's a fact of life, to which Jason agrees.
It is a fact of life, exactly. And that's exactly our point. Thank you, Kemper, Jason. That is so true. Well, that is our conclusion. Conflict just is. And so what do we do with it? How do we use it? And where can we consider it an opportunity for growth and actually an opportunity to strengthen the relationships and the organizations? Bill, do you have anything you'd like to add here?
I just like to reiterate what is, I think, an absolutely critical part of that thinking differently, or a way of thinking differently that you alluded to in your opening statement, Wanda, and that is that conflict just is. There is this, in the way Wanda and I like to approach conflict resolution, there is an element of philosophy. I think probably a more specific term would be Zen. It transcends. It is. In fact, Kemper, you nailed it. You said it's a fact of life. If you can just take that one step further and start thinking of it just is. you're following into our path of thinking about it. Now, beyond that, once you start with that, you can start laying all sorts of values, judgments, conditions, morals, and even facts, if you think there are such things that are worth bringing into a conflict. But the fact is that those are all things that you're bringing, or they're bringing. Not what conflict brings, it's what the people engaged in the conflict bring. So I think that's such a phenomenally important point, and I wouldn't want us to, Wanda and I, to get off on our individual tangents here without making it clear to you that where we're coming from with that is decidedly different than where many, if not most of us, start with conflict. One of the questions was conflict is what was the question in the poll? Wanda, conflict is
destructive, or
yeah. Well, no. Conflict just is. It can be made to be a very destructive endeavor or phenomenon, but you must understand that that's by way of what the people involved in it bring to it. Otherwise, it just is.
Another way I like to think about it is that it's like a thunderstorm that you can see brewing off on the horizon. And like a thunderstorm, it can bring the destruction, but also it can bring the refreshing rains that clear us from the drought that we had all summer here in the Midwest, or it can bring the destructive rains that we've seen, that some of you are dealing with right now as we speak. And like a thunderstorm, it can bring the clearing waters afterwards, and it can bring to the surface things that really need to be addressed. So in our work with conflict, we understand that it's a clash between opposing needs and interests and underlying values. And also it's important to remember that those are sometimes actual needs and sometimes they're perceived needs. So conflict is a clash over resources and objectives, and at the underlying root, it often has to do with our very identity. And at this point, we would like to hear from you folks about where in these descriptions of clash between needs and interests and values, or over resources, objectives, or beliefs and identity, what are the kinds of things that you have seen that really ring true for this?
If I could just expand on something there, Wanda?
Of course.
You see, even talking about it, it's tough for us to get away from adding value to it. Here, on the one hand, we've just said that it just is, and what do we call it? A clash. A clash. Well, that's a very value-laden description, and so even us in the business have a hard time separating from the limitations of our understanding of it, but we're getting better at it all the time, and we hope that you can at least consider the possibility that even though we call it a clash, it's a clash between people. Oftentimes are peoples bringing something to it. The fact, the venue, the phenomenon just is.
How do you understand conflict? I mean, in terms of the work that you do over the resources or the objectives or the identities involved or whatever, how do you frame the conflicts that you work with?
particularly here in Michigan, is that many of the environmental health departments have lost staff, lost funding, and are actually trying to do the same job but crammed into a 4-day week, not a 5-day week. So with that, I think that affects all three of those. Their professional identity is challenged because they know there's just not enough of them to go around to do the job. I'm looking at the chat window here. Can both of you see those answers coming in?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to sign off here for a second.
Oh, thank you, Catherine. A matter of perspective is a huge piece, and
Jason.
And not having the resources. Exactly.
Jason.
And go ahead, Bill.
Jason makes the comment, regulated community sometimes doesn't have the resources to meet the regulatory objectives.
This is Jason. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It'd be a lot easier to just turn my mic on. You know, I think a lot of times we don't have real good answers, at least in my area here. I'm working for a local health department. I'm dealing with on-site wastewater issues, individual homes with septic systems, and you know, a lot of times the problem arises somebody needs to replace a failing system and they just don't have the money to do it. And you know, we try to steer them to some resources for assistance if they're available, but those are pretty few. So a lot of times the problem just gets drawn out and then doesn't get solved nearly as quickly as everybody would like. And it's not necessarily that, it's not always that people don't want to fix the problem. It's just that they don't have the means to do it.
So is the usual approach to that then just to accept the reality of incompatibility, expectations, but no way to meet those expectations, or is there some kind of internal underground that deals with that kind of thing?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess it's not just basically accepting that nothing's going to happen, but we do have a tendency to allow maybe more time than we should before we move on to enforcement and trying to solve things that way, which oftentimes is difficult too. I mean, if you find somebody that doesn't have enough money to fix their problem, they're going to have less money to fix their problem.
Gary has raised an important description of it. I believe it's a conflict between the health and safety and environment concerns. For all, I mean, all of those are the issues of concern, and then the ability to pay for a suitable fix, whether it's the homeowner or a corporate or a community. And yeah, great. Well, yeah, let's take a look at. Oh, go ahead.
One of the real issues is that if you're extremely poor, and particularly if you're elderly or have children in the home, if you're already in that situation, there's a certain amount of access for assistance. But the threshold is so low that the ordinary working person who is basically struggling from one paycheck to the next, has a mortgage, has kids at school, has to keep the car fixed, doesn't qualify for those programs. And in the current banking situation, it's almost impossible to get a small personal loan now to take out for enough to fix a basic system. And they're left with the only other option, which is the credit card, which is not a good option. And there are a number of programs in operation in different states which are exemplary, but there's no overall program to just fix the problem. And that, I think, is a great causes stress for people who are in the regulatory agency of having to issue citations. And as Jason said, what's the point of finding somebody who doesn't have the money to fix the problem anyway? So.
Has there ever been enough money?
There's never been the programs. I don't think it's the money. I don't think there has ever been a national program. There are individual states, and within states there are individual programs. But an overall effort to provide a funding for people just to apply for a no-interest, low-interest loan is happening on an ad hoc basis. So,
is there any difference between those jurisdictions, states, counties, cities, whatever, that do provide, and those that don't, that could be kind of identified as this is what those that don't need?
Oh, absolutely.
What are those?
We've done a couple of workshops, and when there was a stimulus funding program, I believe Ohio took advantage of that and did quite a bit of repair work and set up a loan program. But it's a question of culture, I think.
Okay. Okay. So it's worth considering then, in the larger scheme of this discussion, that we may be looking at, if we're looking at solutions or answers to some of the concerns, we could be talking about cultural things, cultural issues.
Well, it certainly would be nice if out of all of the conflict there came a solution. She says, dragging us back to the subject of the day. We could talk about funding for wastewater systems till the cows come home, but as cows do a lot more than human beings, we probably better get back to the human beings. So go ahead.
Well, we work on the premise that that actually we can learn the skills for effective and productive resolutions, and that there are many possible solutions. Although we get into these kind of black holes where we feel like there really is a sense of helplessness. And one of the ways that really can make a difference, I think, is that how we define the problem or how we define the conflict, it is about 85% of the work in terms of shaping the way we resolve it. And one of the perspectives that I think it gets lost sometimes is that each of the participants in the conflict has a really distinct and valid perspective on the underlying problem. And when people are really able to hear each other out, I mean, you folks, you talk about that situation where the homeowner clearly understands the need for clean water, that clearly understands the need for a new septic system and simply can't afford it. And yet when, if you broaden the conversation and bring in the community resources too, there may be that each of the participants might be able to find ways that nobody has thought of it at any one point. And of course, you know that violence escalates the problems, and positive resolutions de-escalate. One of the things that I heard recently in a totally different setting, one of the parts of my work is in the school setting with special education, and an attorney advocate for parents said that there is nothing like success to help us deal with our conflicts. And so when we look at the things that have worked, the systems that work, and look at what it takes for people to get creative, then sometimes we can find the solutions that are beyond what we have come to think about it. And Bill mentioned early on that really what everybody brings to the conflict is worth taking a look at, and what you yourself bring to the conflict. Not only certainly the resources and the outer dynamics in terms of the regulations trigger a lot of the conflict, but what do you personally bring into the settings, into your organizations, into the workplace, into the conversations with your what do you call them, clients or the citizens? How do you take on conflict yourself? And here's one quick little way of, here's how this is useful. I have found that if we had more time and were able to explore the different ways that this, or the different times when these various approaches might be useful. I think one thing that is especially useful when we're working with organizations in conflict, when I do workplace conflict, we talk about which of these styles are particularly difficult for you to deal with. If you are, Beth, in those times when you're really wishing to be assertive and directive, which of the other approaches are particularly difficult for you to deal with? And taking a look at that, I'm not necessarily asking you directly, Beth, but using that as an example. Or Kemper, when you're ready to collaborate or compromise, what's it like for you to have to deal with somebody who comes in and says this way, or I'm out of here, and or I'll see you in court? So accommodate is hard. Exactly. It's are you leaving because I offended you, Kemper?
Okay, yes. That's funny.
I think that's the difficulty is when the two styles meet, and it also can be one of the best turning points, like for an organization, thinking of it in that context where you have ongoing relationships and you have ongoing conflicts that come and go, and it has a lot to do with the way that you take it on differently. And if you can start to appreciate that those differences might actually bring the best to the whole of the picture. For instance, if you can learn ways to deal with the person when you are ready to really collaborate, and to me collaboration means bringing in everyone's perspective, bringing in their needs, and looking at ways to put it all whole in a piece, like a puzzle. And if you're in that mode and somebody just says, I don't have time for this, it's got to be this, and I'm out of here, how do you deal with that? How do you approach it? And for instance, one way that really works for the assertive directive person is to be able to say to them, look, your perspective is really valuable, but we need a little bit more time, and we need to be able to have everyone's perspective here. And work out a time when those decisions, a timeline, because getting the job done is the most important thing for them. And if they have a timeline, then they are more able to wait. And especially for folks who choose number two, the avoiding method of dealing with conflict, it's a delaying of conflict, but it's not always avoiding forever. Sometimes it's about, let me think about this and I'll get back with you in the morning. And there are a lot of different ways that that people can learn to deal with the other in terms of working with the different styles. And if we had an afternoon with you, we would be working on those, ways to approach the differences.
I noticed.
So, Gary, I want to pay attention to what you...
Yeah, I think Gary hit it on the head. Is that you may want to compromise, but you're a regulator confined to the performing regulatory activities. So you may not have the option to compromise. And how do you, being aware of your body language, being aware of how you appear to the other person who you're having to say, look, I don't have any option here. This is, the law is telling me I have to do this, and that I have to tell you that you have to do this.
Well, I suggest that there are some tools that you can really use even in those settings. I mean, even when you've got the wedge that makes it seem impossible. What we have found in working with conflict is that so often, if people can be really heard, they become a lot more willing to look at the bigger picture. And these simple steps that look almost like they're too obvious have actually been really workable tools. I've used those in working a lot, like I said, in the parent and school setting, where the school, and it's really important for them to be able to listen. And there's this whole business about, being able to listen exactly where the other person is coming from. And sometimes it takes 10 minutes. Sometimes I've heard from other folks in the regulation business, you get somebody going and they want to talk for hours. But I suggest that a lot of times if you can just interrupt them and say, okay, wait a minute, let me see if I got it. And then you feed back to them what you heard, not with all your yes, buts, no, we can't do that, but you give back to them just what you heard from them. And then if you say, did I get it? And they say yes, you add, is there more? And if we were in a room together, we would practice this. And again, like I say, this just seems way too simple, but we've worked in really complex conflicts where the ability to actually hear what the other one is saying, that ability to be heard is a huge part of diffusing the conflict. I'm just checking your notes here. Bill or Dendra, do you have anything you'd like to add?
You've laid the groundwork there, Wanda, for introducing, and of course what we'd love to do is not just introduce but expand upon, but of course there's not enough time to do that today. But so we'll just introduce some very essential elements of conflict, which could go a long way towards helping you individuals understand what you're dealing with. I know you feel it. You're in the midst of it, and I wouldn't want to be misinterpreted when I say understand what you're dealing with. But here's what I mean by that. I think a lot of us just kind of look at conflict as a big black cloud that can be approached in various ways, and we muddle through it in our own way, when in fact there are several very distinct parts of a conflict. And it's the same whether we're talking about conflict such as you deal with, or conflict such as folks around the world deal with. These elements are universal. One is that there's generally an interest or interests, and key to productive conversation towards resolution is having a clear understanding and evaluation of the interests involved. And when Wanda was talking about listening, she was alluding to this. What we're listening for, what's absolutely essential, is to listen for the actual interests. Now, that sounds simple enough, but I dare say that given the way we communicate, given the differences in the way we perceive the world, and that's the world around us immediately, and the global world, identifying and understanding those interests isn't as easy as one might think. And so being a good listener, committing to listening, which is all about understanding. We use the term listening to refer to understanding. Did you hear me? Really means, do you understand me? So identifying the interests, knowing that that's a universal, that there are always interests, and there could be more than one. Sometimes there is one major interest, but sometimes there are multiple interests. And interests are just one step away from needs. Needs. What do we need? What do you need? What is it exactly that you need to deal with in order to resolve this solution? And needs, by the way, as you probably already know, are quite distinct from wants. We sometimes confuse them, but in every conflict there are needs, and in every conflict there are wants. And it's part of the good conflict resolver to clearly identify the distinction between them in any particular conflict. Another important element of all conflict is positions. Everybody takes positions, and those positions can sometimes be just exquisitely naughty. I mean, as in K-N-O-T-T-Y, not N-A-U-G-H-T-Y. Exquisitely naughty. Why do we take those positions? Morality, values, beliefs, background, experiences. They all come together in a position we're taking towards any one issue. So I think just understanding that whenever you're looking at anything called conflict, you're also looking at the components of that conflict, which are issues, interests, needs, and positions. So for whatever that's worth, and of course that's the stuff of a much longer training session, but just understanding that, I think, can give you a better sense of what in fact you're dealing with, when in fact, if in fact, you've got an actual conflict on your hands.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm sure everybody on the call here has had this experience, and actually I was self-regulating myself while I was listening to that. I used to be a serial interrupter many years ago. I was thinking about how I was going to respond to what was being said before the person had finished saying it. And in the process of that, of course, I wasn't really listening to what the person had said. And this is one of probably the most valuable skills and disciplines that I learned. And what happens when you're not listening to what the other person is saying, and a really, really wonderful long-time local regulator said this best. He said, 9 times out of 10, When people are really angry and unhappy, they just want someone to listen to them. Because it's not just, you're the straw that broke the camel's back. There are all these other things going on in their life that you're just the last thing that they can't deal with, and you're the person that stands for everything they want to shout at. And that has always stuck in my mind a lot. So what advice would you give to the people on this or watching it later on? How do you practice or discipline yourself to let people talk until they take a breath without interrupting them, and then deal with it? And go ahead, Bill. Why don't you talk about active listening?
To expand upon that a bit, Denver, we talk a lot about listening, but we also relate it to probably an even more important outcome of good listening, which is affirmation. My goodness, how many times have I been in a conflict resolution session where it was clear that one party simply wanted to be affirmed. The whole business of conflict, from the moment it descended upon this this couple or this group, has been about de-affirmation of one by the other, such that folks lose sense of their own dignity and inherent value. It's enormous. Everybody wants to be affirmed, and it's something that costs virtually nothing. And how many of us, however, hunger for it so much that we've almost given up on getting as much as we want, much less need, or is it the other way around? Need, much less want. But so it's affirmation, and of course, the listening part of it is a skill. It's an unbelievable skill, and one can only marvel at the extent to which things go on as they have and do, given the fact that we're all lousy listeners. It takes 3 lifetimes to become a good listener, maybe even more, and you're constantly under siege to be a bad listener, and so there's no easy way around it. There's no quick fix. It's a skill. It's a skill that one can learn. It doesn't take a lot of material. You don't have to go to college and take listening classes. You have to be patient. You have to be willing to accept different perspectives and viewpoints. You have to be willing to affirm the other person, and not feel that by doing so you're de-affirming yourself. But it's just the most exquisitely important skill one can have in so many areas of one's personal and professional life. I have no doubt that good listening pays off in many ways in the wastewater business, especially in that you're dealing with people under stress and with problems. So to whatever extent you can practice good listening, become a good listener, become a better listener, and practice it in your business, to that extent are you going a long way towards becoming a more effective conflict resolver.
I want to bring back, Beth, something that you commented on quite a while ago, and it fits in here nicely, that one way that you work on dealing with it is that you can't compromise on the regulation, but you can compromise on the deadline. And you're so right that they've had some input into what the final solution is, or the final resolution, and how it's going to happen. And that's where you, you get your interest met in that the problem's been corrected, and they get their interest met that they've had a peace in it. And that's what matters so often, a lot of times, I think, is how you've been able to recognize where they're coming from and what it is that has to be done to make it work. The other, I want to go back a little bit to what you were talking about, Bill. So often when we get tangled up in conflict that just seems like we're up against the wall, what's going on is that we're all stuck in our positions, and that's a term that we use freely in our mediation world. And position, I think of it as a solution or what we want to have done to fix what we think is the problem. And so we're both, we're saying it's got to be this way and it's got to be that way. And if you can recognize that that's just the beginning, instead of, even though it sounds like a demand and it's like, I'm not going to do anything less than this or I'll see you in court. So often when we see that kind of attitude in mediation, I almost don't even pay a lot of attention to it, because I know that that is just where people are starting. And when we're in the midst of, when we're engaging in conflict ourselves, if we don't have the benefit of a third party to calm the waters, I think if we can keep in mind that where the demand or the response or what people are saying must happen is just a beginning point for the conversation. And if they then, after they present their demands, if that your response is, well, what will that do for you? How will that work? Or really to try to listen more to where they're coming from. Suspend your own judgment for a moment. Suspend your own ideas of the solution and get curious about what's going on for them. Where are they coming from that's where they have demanded, or that's what they're saying has to be. And that, being able to untangle that knot, as you call it, Bill, is, I think, a lot of the work in conflict management is being able yourself to step back, like you were saying, Bendra, step back from your own input and your own ideas and your own whatever else you've got to throw in there. Just step back long enough, and a lot of times it doesn't take long if you're really listening and you reflect back and then you say, did I get it? And is there more to it? It's a lot of times then once you've really listened, you've been able to hear some possible solutions that have bubbled, have bubbled up in the midst of that moment of good listening. And then you're ready to move into the brainstorming and, well, what would make it work? How could we make it happen? How could we make this happen? And that's where your idea of, in terms of just, this is the way it's got to be, but what is it going to take to help make it happen? What is it? And you've talked a lot about that. And looking at a comment
in the chat window, which I think is a significant part of why we were asked to host this today. It's that in many ways it is a power struggle. And there is definitely a climate that's been created in the country from entities that we won't go into at this point, is that all regulation is bad, all government is bad, and it gets in the way of letting me do what I want to do. And then you as the regulator are the power figure, and it becomes a power struggle or a contest of wills. And at that point, are you adversaries just for the sake of being adversaries? And recently I've been rereading many of Molly Ivan's books, and she covered Texas politics at the time that it was possibly, maybe even worse than it is today. And at one point she ends one of her books with, it was a hell of a fight, but we had a lot of fun doing it. And the motto being that even in the midst of something that was really unpleasant, if you can't enjoy the process, then you really do start taking it home with you as a knot, a permanent knot inside your stomach. So can we address that, of how you as an individual don't take your work home with you, or take it on with you into a public meeting in the evening?
That's a good question.
There are several.
Go ahead, Wanda.
There are several ways that we talk about that in a lot of the trainings that we do, and one of them is a line that I like is let go of judgment and get curious. And it's about letting go of judgment about yourself as well as about the other one, and just get curious about what's really going on here, so that it's a way of detaching. And that's our second favorite saying in our trainings. We talk about detached awareness. You want to take it, Bill?
Okay. Detached awareness is a state that we think is more appropriately named detached awareness than what was the jargon, part of the jargon when Wanda and I first came into the conflict resolution community, and that was neutrality. I think both Wanda and I are convinced that neutrality is well nigh impossible. From the very beginning, we're pelted with beliefs and conditioning and values, and by the time we become full-blown adults engaged in conflict, we're a walking mass of values. And try separating from that to the state of neutrality, and you're in for the challenge of your life. On the other hand, I don't think it can be denied that many, if not most of us, take on far more judgment than we actually need. We carry around judgment about everything. And in the end, does anybody else really care? And what, in fact, is all that judgment doing for you? Is it making life better? Is it making your life more acceptable and easier to live? It doesn't hurt to take a good look at one's gunny sack every now and then, and take out what values and judgments are necessary. And what you'll find is that you might not even need the gunny sack anymore, because none of those values and judgments are absolutely necessary. You just thought they were. And so we call what used to be called neutrality in our work detached awareness. And again, it's one of those exquisitely difficult states that probably takes 2 or 3 lifetimes to work on. But you can get started on that wherever you are in life right away. Detaching means pretty much disposing of all the judgment you have around any one thing, any one person that you don't need. Just detaching from it, and in the process, becoming more aware of what's going on, becoming more aware of who you're listening to and what they're saying, becoming more aware of how you're reacting to it. And both are possible. They're two things that we've all engaged in one way or in time or place or another, probably separately, but certainly we've all become less attached to something or someone, and we've all become more aware of something or someone. And so all we ask is that the folks who want to get more effective at resolving conflict practice detached awareness. And here's, of course, if you want to turn this into a Zen thing, like I suggested earlier, here is a phrase that your most ardent Buddhist could probably relate very comfortably to: detached awareness. It's simply a state of being that that we think lends itself more effectively to understanding, dealing with, and eventually resolving the kind of conflicts that beset us in work and in personal life.
And although where we're coming from, that neutrality was a part of our role, but where you're coming from as regulators, it's not about being neutral at all, but it is, I think it's still a valuable presence for you folks in your work to pay attention, to be aware at what kind of presence you carry into the meeting, what kind of what's going on with yourself, all physically, mentally, spiritually, if you will. What are the things that you're carrying into this moment, and then which parts of those really can help you be most effective? And so that whole the challenge that when you've had really difficult encounters with people, and how can you really engage and bring your best self into that moment is part of what we're talking about. And then how can you just let it be, not let it define you? And that's where I talk about, letting go of that judgment and just get curious about what would it take? What is the best thing? What can we do here? How can we pull this together to make it work? Those are some of our suggestions. I don't know if that helps at all, Dendra, or if you'd like it to take us in a different direction.
I've known at least two people that I've had a pleasure of working with over the last 30-odd years, who became very ill, high blood pressure. One developed a heart condition, strictly from the stress, mainly from the stress, but also because they had difficult family situations too. But I think it's really important to leave it at work. It's so hard to do that, and it's so hard to train yourself to do that, and especially as most of the folks on this call today have evening meetings that they have to go and attend, public meetings where the conflict is not confined to your office across the desk or across the counter, but it's you take it with you in the car when you go into a meeting room of 30, 40 people who are all unhappy with you for one reason or another. So is there any advice you could give to the listeners and to the people who are viewing this later? How do you deal with mass conflict?
What was the word? What kind of conflict?
Mass conflict.
Mass conflict.
Lots and lots of people all are ready to get up and tear your throat out.
Yeah. Well, that's... can you relate any of what we've said to that scenario, Denver? For example, people who want to tear your throat out. I know that people have wanted to tear my throat out, rip my face off, in times when I have clearly come across as not interested. That's your problem. Don't think that I'm as concerned about your problem as I am about mine. I mean, the messages I was sending clearly de-affirmed the individual, or the individuals, the mass, and so while that might not be the response one might find effective in a huge mass, it could very well, I think, speak to some in that mass, and depending upon the size of the mass, it might speak to most. Clearly, everybody wants and needs to be affirmed, whether it's the position they're taking, whether it's the stress, the pain, the circumstance that we don't clearly understand the negative dimensions of. If they'll just be affirmed or confirmed in the way it's bearing on them, that can go a long way towards diminishing people's hostility. I mean, it might save your throat under some circumstance. I understand. No, don't say I understand. Don't say I understand. That's too intellectual. Say something else. Say something else that indicates that you get it. You really get it. Bill Clinton was good at that. Bill Clinton says, "I feel your pain." Did he? Who knows whether he did or not. But I dare say that under those circumstances, "I feel your pain," went a lot further in affirming that they have pain than if he had said, "I understand." That's purely intellectual. And understanding is not feeling.
One of the techniques I heard from a really skilled meeting moderator was just to smile. Well, not smile, because then you can be viewed as being quite condescending, but to have a nice calm demeanor about it and to project that calm out into the room. And eventually people have to take a breath, and eventually they run out of things to shout and scream about. And at the point there's a lull, you can single out someone in that audience and say something like, "Now, let me understand what you just said. Am I understanding?" And it goes back to your step one, diffusing the intensity. Let me just make sure that I'm hearing what you just said, and that I understand what I know we're not supposed to use the word understand, but that I'm clear in my own mind what the real issues here are. Is this right? Because then you really have given away some of your power to the people in the audience, and you're probably not going to make everybody happy. But standing there shouting and appealing for civil discourse and behavior is never going to work. And as I'm sure a couple of the people on this call will attest, that there are professional shouters that go to meetings that are really only there to disrupt the proceedings for everyone else. And at that point, I'm not sure there is a way to deal with them short of having people ejected, and as it's usually a public meeting, you can't even do that. So how do you deal with that when you're caught between a rock and a hard place of having an unruly audience? So the calming techniques for the participants here they can take away with them.
Well, I have several ideas for, in terms of just running public meetings, how you structure the meeting from the beginning, and the presence that you bring, the calm presence, like you mentioned, Dendra, is a huge piece of it. And how you structure it makes a lot of difference. And I conducted a meeting just the other day, and the organizers of the meeting expected that there would be a lot of dissension and conflict among the participants. And when I was asked to facilitate the meeting, the organizers said, "I'm afraid that they're going to, attack the main speaker." So I facilitated while there was another presenter. But one of the things that we did, just in terms of structuring the meeting, was to have people write out their questions and questions for the presenter, rather than giving everyone a microphone. And then I asked the questions. I organized them. We had them on cards, and I organized them according to themes. And then I asked the presenter the questions as the facilitator. And so at the end of that hour, we were able to cover all of the questions. And sometimes, people wanted to add their stories, and recognizing that their story was an important one, we asked them to hold it till the end of the time, and we could talk about it after the meeting. But so I don't know if, I mean, your Public Meetings Acts have all kinds of regulations about how you conduct that, but how you structure the seating. We talk a lot about how you prepare the table in terms of you know, who sits where and who has access to the microphone, and how much time do you give for the public comment, or do you have a timekeeper? Do you have a yellow card that says 1 minute left, and then a red card that says thanks, your time's up? You know, how do you structure that, and how much flexibility do you have in looking at the structure of that? That's a huge part, especially when there's a lot of heat and it's a public meeting. Sometimes breaking them into theme groups or into neighborhoods or whatever, and having them come up with one spokesperson. We did that one time when we had a 30-person mediation, and it was a neighborhood dispute, and it was around land use issues, but we had them work in small groups and come up with a spokesperson that could bring their concerns back to the large group. And so that's another day's training on how to work with large group conflict and facilitating angry meetings.
If I could just take a couple of minutes of that, several observations from the texted messages. Gary talks about compromise, and Beth talks about compromise, and I get the sense that that compromise is a tool then available in this business. And I just wanted to make the observation that that if you have access to that tool, then in many ways you're more well equipped than in much conflict situations. Compromise is a handy, a flexible, a very useful tool in conflict, which has gotten kind of a bad rap. And to the extent that you can play around with compromise, stretch it, mold it, customize it, I would urge you to take all possible advantage of it. What we're finding is in the world generally, with the increase in group identity, ethnic identity, and rights for one organization or another, just an ascending of volume in that direction, that we're having to compromise all over the place in ways that before would have been totally outside our bailiwick. We're compromising and finding that, in fact, it's not only a useful tool, but it's the only one under these circumstances. It's not a bad thing. It's been given a bad rap. Compromise means two people making a promise. You make a promise, I'll make a promise. And if you have access to that technique, by all means, consider yourself reasonably well equipped to deal with conflict. And to the extent you can, use it.
And Kemper, you give us a good challenge on that note, that you have some clients that getting project approval is secondary, but being victorious over the regulators is primary, or over the policy. And so compromise in that setting makes it more problematic even into the future. So that's a good challenge for us. And one of the things that I've come to observe after working in conflict all these years, that there really are folks that, particularly those that hang on to the assertive, directive approach to conflict, they really want the other side to come up against and to push hard. That if you're not pushing back, it's seen as a matter of weakness there, and they have no respect for you. And so I don't know. I think some football players might give us better advice on this one. That I think that's one of the challenges. But at the same time, again, validating and affirming where they're coming from. Well, and Bender wrote the importance of first impressions. You want to go for another hour?
No, I got something sticky on my mouth there. It wasn't traveling across the screen there. No, I know we could have multiple topics as part of a course on dealing with conflict and stress management, but for the convenience of the people who are here today and signed up for their 90-minute workshop, we are almost at the close. Do you have any closing questions, or anyone have any other questions or comments for Bill and Wanda? I did put both of their contact information into the chat window. You will all be getting a confirmation email from me when the recording is available, and there will be some additional resources that will be coming to you. And that being said, I'll be going to move on to our closing slide. And at the end of this, I'm going to turn the recording off, and if you have other things that you want to discuss with Bill and Wanda, we'll keep the room open for a little while. That's our contact information again. You will find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and on Pinterest. On our website, you'll find a little logo button that we would appreciate if you posted to your website, and encourage people to learn about us, sign up for our e-news so that you receive information about other upcoming workshops. And I want to leave you with a thought that many years ago now, I was involved personally in the issue of great conflict, and it really felt like the adversary was somebody that I would personally never want to see again, and could not see any redeeming features in this person. And a very wise friend of mine looked at me and said, nobody is wholly good or wholly bad. Nobody always, ever, never. And she sent me a little plaque that to this day I keep on my desk. It said, even Hitler had a dog. And regardless of how you think about that, it makes me smile every time I see it, because it is true that within everybody who you think is a total word we can't say on the public airwaves, there's something about them that somebody loves and somebody likes, and even though at that particular moment you might be on opposite sides of a very contentious issue, try to find something to compliment them about. I always say, oh, my goodness, that is, and I've noticed people doing it to me now, oh, that's a beautiful pin you're wearing, or I really like that sweater, where did you get it, or it's such a lovely day out there, what do you plan on doing after this meeting? Personally, I'd like to go for a walk, would you like to come with me? Which might be a bit odd, but find something to connect to with this individual or this group that is completely different from the issue that you're about to have a fight over. For example, recently I ended one meeting with isn't it just diabolical that there isn't a hockey season this year? That started a whole other avenue of argument, so at that point I realized that wasn't the best thing to say. At this point, I am going to close the recording. Thank you all for being here. and join us again for the next Tuesday at 2 presentation. But don't leave. If you would like to carry on the conversation, we'll be here for a little while longer.